Welcome to The Drum Shuffle, a podcast offering insights, perspectives, and conversations for drummers. I'm your host, Jamie Eads.
Hey, how's it going out there, everybody? Welcome to the Drum Shuffle Podcast. Jamie Eads joining you as I do each and every week. This is episode 161. I hope everybody is having a fantastic week out there in Drumland. We're having a great week over here at the Drum Shuffle World headquarters. We are headed firmly into fall and the Halloween season, and we have a related interview today. I'll explain more in just a second, but we're going to be joined by Dylan Jack of the Dylan Jack Quartet in just a moment with one of the most unique albums of this season, in my opinion, and we're going to talk all about that right after this message from our sponsor, Los Cabos Drumsticks. The best kept secret for drummers is finally out. Los Cabos Drumsticks may look like the sticks you grew up with, but these are not your father's drumsticks. Los Cabos Drumsticks is Canada's #1 drumstick brand, and they are coming to a retailer near you. With operations in over 28 countries worldwide, thousands of drummers have already discovered the Los Cabos difference. Using FSC certified wood from Canada and the US, Los Cabos make the finest quality drumsticks, percussion tools, and accessories on the market. The best news, Los Cabos Drumsticks offers you a ton of choice. They have 22 individual drumstick models and 14 percussion tools, many of which are available in 3 different wood types: maple, white hickory, and red hickory. Red hickory comes from the center or heart of the hickory tree and has been independently proven to be both stronger and more elastic than white hickory without adding a lot of weight. While most drumstick manufacturers have shunned red hickory, Los Cabos Drumsticks has embraced it, becoming the only established stick brand in the world to offer a full line of red hickory drumsticks. To learn more about Los Cabos Drumsticks, visit them online at loscabosdrumsticks.com, follow them on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and don't forget to ask for Los Cabos Drumsticks at your favorite retailer. Dare to be different. Join the Red Hickory Revolution with Los Cabos Drumsticks. All right, guys and girls, as I mentioned, we're going to be joined today by Dylan Jack, and his group, the Dylan Jack Quartet, is about to release an album, and I am not a French speaker, but it's Eine Quartett Des Grauens. This album is coming out on October 27th, 23, so here in just about a week or so, but it is, quote, a spontaneously composed soundtrack to the 1922 film Nosferatu, which, of course, was kind of the predecessor to the modern-day Dracula. It is such a cool idea, and they're doing all kinds of shows around this, up in the Massachusetts area. So if you can grab some tickets, you should do so. But this is a really, really interesting project. But it is essentially, they've created a live music accompaniment for this silent film here in the Halloween season. And it is really, really cool. I didn't get it at first. I'll be the first to admit that. But once I figured out what this project was about, it just became uber cool to me. So I was really happy to be able to hook up with Dylan, and we did this interview a while back, so I got a really early copy of the record. But we did this interview back in, I think, late July or early August, and I've saved this episode to coincide with the release of the record on the 27th of October. And I know that you're going to get a lot out of this because Dylan's just such a cool guy and does such great work, and his playing is so tasty. So please help me welcome to the Drum Shuffle, Dylan Jack. Hey, good afternoon, Dylan. How's it going, man?
It's going fantastic. How are you?
I cannot complain a bit. Boston, correct? Is that where you're at today?
Yeah, so I've been based in a small town called Tewksbury, about 25 minutes to a half hour north of Boston. But my wife and I recently, as of 3 months ago, moved to Bristol, Rhode Island. But most of my playing career and teaching career is still up in Massachusetts.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, when people say Rhode Island and Massachusetts, I always assumed it was two different states, but I guess a lot of people kind of commute in and out, right? I mean, that's kind of local, so to speak. Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah. A lot of people, a lot of teachers too, commute from New York to teach at Berkeley too. So it's kind of the whole, Northeast is very much accessible, which is nice to people living in Rhode Island, Connecticut, Maine, Vermont, whatever it may be, even New York. Kind of Boston and that central area is it's enticing to a lot of people from different states, and oftentimes the commute is very worth it. So it's like its own little community, New England, New York, all that sort of Northeast.
Yeah, for sure, man. Well, our old friend Rod Morgenstein, he commuted from Long Island to Berkeley for 25 years or something and just recently retired. So I know that's definitely a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, cool, man.
Yeah,
So go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, just aside from Bert, I knew somebody who would commute from Connecticut and would teach at the conservatory. And, what's nice is a lot of those places will put teachers up for a few days so they don't have to go home. So again, it's a very enticing career if you can get that, for sure.
Yeah, for sure, man. Well, so tell me a little bit, for those listeners that may not be familiar with your career, we'll start at the very beginning. So I'm assuming you grew up there. How did you, get into music and drumming in particular? Do you come from a musical family?
Kind of. My dad played guitar, in some bands and a few shows here and there. But I think the important thing was there was always a guitar or an acoustic guitar and electric guitar in the house. So it was my brother and I, it was in our grasp. So music, was not necessarily played a lot, but, we had access to those instruments and just kind of strummed along. And of course, we grew up in the MTV age where that was pivotal for he and I, as being introduced to music in the 90s and things like that. So, not necessarily a very musical family, but a family that encouraged, musical participation, which was nice.
Yeah, for sure, man. Well, if your dad was a guitarist, I'm assuming when you said drums, he was probably like, oh, hell no.
No, the opposite. That man came home from work one day and said, my coworker is getting rid of this drum set. Do you guys want a drum set? And we just said, yeah. Of course we do.
That's awesome, man. Well,
so it was.
Yeah, I joke all the time. Parents that let their kids take up drumming, there's a special spot in the afterlife for them, for sure.
Yes, absolutely, and God bless my parents and dealing with daily after school rehearsals and then practicing after rehearsals and lugging me when I couldn't drive to rehearsals or performances. So yeah, they've, again, very supportive, although they weren't super, super musical, at least on my mother's side. But my dad, yeah, he had some.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. So at what age did the drum set show up? Did you start as a really early on in life?
Yeah, I was 8 years old. I remember I was in third grade, 8 years old. We got one of those made in Japan kits, like a stencil kit. Yeah. And I didn't know anything about that at the time, but it was just two rack toms, a floor tom with no legs and a bass drum, and one super thick pingy cymbal. That's all it was. And it was the greatest thing in the world to me as an 8-year-old.
Yeah, for sure, man. I think we all started on one of those made in Japan stencil kits, the CB 700s or whatever it was, and it was just the greatest thing ever. So when you first started gravitating towards drumming, you said your parents were very supportive. Did they get you involved in any kind of formal lessons, or were you doing school band, those kind of things?
No, and they were never really ones to kind of push it. It was one of those things that if I asked, they would say, sure. And I took one lesson at a local music shop, and they handed me stick control. And I still have that copy to this day. I did one lesson playing, I did I think like 6 different stickings, taught me to hold my sticks. And I really enjoyed it. But for some reason, I don't know why, I never went back. And then up until age 18, I was self-taught with just one lesson.
Yeah. Well, it's because
I regret it.
Yeah, it's because they handed you stick control at your first lesson. That's why you didn't go back. So
yeah, and it's funny as an educator, that's the first thing I do now to my students is here's stick control. Boom, just hand them the first page, and this is what you guys will be working on for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
So
yeah, essentially. Well, I find that interesting because my background is very similar to yours. It was just beg mom until you get the drum set or whatever, and then put on your favorite Zeppelin record or, Motley Crue or Kiss or whatever it was at the time, Aerosmith. And, I was self-taught. And when I look back now as a guy in his mid 40s, I go, gosh, I really wish I had done stick control and really learned how to do the rudiments right and molar technique and all those things. So I'm assuming when you graduated high school and decided to kind of pursue this, was it a real big shock to the system to go in as a self-taught drummer and start doing kind of the formal education?
Oh man, it was. But even before that, when I graduated, I started taking lessons, but I've been playing my whole life, concerts and gigs. But man, I was rejected from Berkeley. I got I had teachers tell me I should change my career when I was at the University of Massachusetts. I mean, I went in super green. I wasn't ready. I got in, I showed them that I could play, but I had pretty bad experience with that. And I'm not going to say that's what shaped me into being like a hardcore practicer or anything, but yeah, I see kids now that I have teaching summer camps, music camps, or leading lessons. The ability these kids have at such a young age because of lessons, and it was a real downer for me to look back at that. And I'm like, man, I wish I did lessons. But yeah, I went into it as green as I could, and it was rough. It was really disheartening to hear some of the things and to be rejected and all of that. But yeah, anybody listening, take lessons. Have your children take lessons. It's very, very formative time, and I think they're very valuable. Lessons are huge with a good teacher, of course.
Yeah, it goes without saying you got to find the right guy or girl to teach your kids or teach yourself. I just remember when I was in high school. And I certainly don't want to make this about me, but I remember when I had the realization, I'd played a few gigs with a garage band and, thought I was, the cat's pajamas or whatever. And one of my guidance counselors was like, well, you should try to do the Berkeley summer program as, a sophomore in high school or whatever, and see if that's something that would interest you. And, I requested some information, they snail mailed me, some charts, and they were like, okay, now play this Latin groove at 80 BPM, 100 BPM, and 120 BPM. And I was like, I have no idea what this means. They might as well have sent me like a space shuttle launch control book. I mean, there was just no hope. And I knew right then, hey, I've got to really think about doing something different here. So I just kind of wanted to drive that point home that there's great opportunities out there, but you got to be ready for those opportunities. Yeah.
And I find that, when you're faced with that kind of stuff, something you don't understand, words and terminology, and, that's the biggest, for me, it was always the biggest, inspiration. Like now I have to do this. Now I have to learn this. Now I have to get a book on this. I have to sort of tackle that issue. And so, you can definitely use that to your advantage to grow as a musician, drummer, or anything.
Yeah, for sure. Now, you said you attended UMass. Were you studying, classical, contemporary, jazz, or was it all of the above?
Yeah, so I did a mixture of both. contemporary, with, mostly jazz and some mallet percussion. And then I ended up leaving, and then I ended up going to get my bachelor's degree in Minnesota. So, I left the state and basically because Berkeley rejected me, as I said before. It's like, I'm not going to sit around and wait to audition again. I'm going to go somewhere else and get my degree, which I did. And so, but that school that I went to was strictly contemporary music, drum set based.
Gotcha. Okay. And presumably, and I don't know what part of Minnesota you were in, but presumably you were getting some bandstand education as well while you were there.
Yeah. I wish I got a little bit more. I'm a different person now, and I look back and I took advantage of the opportunity, but, I wish I took advantage of a little bit more. But I did get bandstand opportunity, but mostly, which was interesting, was I got a lot more, professional experience while I was out there too. So I did a lot more playing out than I did in like the school big band or something like that. I was doing more outside playing, even with some of the teachers, which is really nice, which is a great experience.
Yeah, for sure, man. Well, and I tell people all the time, the best education you're ever going to get in the music business is to go out and gig. I just think there's so much you can learn from that. I'm not downplaying the education piece of it. I'm just saying that if you want to do it for a living as a professional, unless you're going to be doing movie scores or Broadway or something like that, just get out and play. That's the big thing. Yeah.
And it's interesting. I'll tell my students that too, who want to pursue a career in music. I'll give them the pros and cons. And then, this guy is on my mind because my wife and I watched his documentary yesterday, but Frank Zappa, someone like Frank Zappa, who just has a go-get-him attitude like anybody can have. You go to the library and you can absorb all that information, and you can, be college graduate level just by learning on your own. It's so crucial to just, self-study. School's great, connections, all of that stuff. The education's awesome, but getting out there and doing it and taking the risks and sitting down and like putting your mind to work and becoming an individual voice. It's you don't need that strong educational background, I guess.
Yeah. Well, somebody like, you mentioned Zappa, somebody like that, he was clearly born with like 3 brains. Right. He's just like the smartest guy in any room that he walks into. But his drive, that's something that can't be taught. Right. Just
right.
I don't know how many thousands of hours of tape still exist in his vault that we'll never hear, but he was constantly creating. I just can't imagine having that much creative juice flowing all the time.
Yeah. It was, it's inspiring. Maybe we can't all, reach that level of Zappa creativity, but at least we can be inspired by that and kind of learn that there's a lot that we can do on our own. We don't need to go do, spend thousands and thousands. We can learn and be inspired and try to get some of that drive.
Yeah, for sure, man. Well, that's a great point. So after getting the undergrad degree in Minnesota, did you move back to Massachusetts at that point, or did you stay in the Midwest for a bit? Talk to me about that career transition.
Yeah, so I had it in my head as soon as I graduated, I was going to come back, and I did. I came right back, and I hit the ground running. Cold emails for lit teaching and cold emails for bands. So as soon as I graduated, came home, about a month later, I was playing 3-4 times a week with a blues band, playing kind of blues rock around New England, up in Maine, southern Massachusetts, sometimes in New York with them, which is cool. I kind of joined the blues rock world as soon as I graduated.
Gotcha. And you've been teaching, I'm assuming, ever since then, because, obviously your teaching chops are there, but were you giving lessons as soon as you got back to town as well?
I was giving lessons 2 months since I had 2 months of not teaching, and then I got right into it. So I was pretty quick.
Gotcha. So you were doing
very, very quick.
You were pursuing both paths then, both,
Yes.
giving lessons and gigging and all that stuff. So, help me out here, because I know that you also have kind of a heavy background. I mean, you've played in thrash bands and things like that. So talk to me a little bit about, some of those career choices. Were you just playing in whatever opportunity was available, or were you like, no, I'm going to do this particular genre of music? And then talk to me a little bit about, the transition back to jazz, because, I think thrash metal to jazz is that's a pretty big leap, but it's awesome. It's cool.
Yeah. I mean, jazz was always an afterthought to me. In fact, it was, heavy metal, death metal was my first love when it came to music. I grew up with it, hearing bands like White Zombie from my brother, the early Metallica stuff, Pantera, all that's, that great stuff. But there were, music magazines, and as a kid, I would go into the mall with my friends, and there were 3 magazines I would buy. It was Circus, Hit Parader, and I think it was like Metal Maniacs. And I would look up every band I could that looked cool, and I would just listen or cold buy records or CDs and listen to everything I could. But, it was just the music that I was drawn to. I wasn't an aggressive kid, but there was something about distorted guitars, guttural vocals. And I think I've always been fascinated with some of the horror theme stuff behind it. And so it was kind of like a fantasy world in a way that you could live in while listening to it. And then you've got these, blasting drums, these heavy riffs, and these, starts and stops. And then, just this very theatric kind of thing almost. And I think any kid at that age, it was kind of sort of, at least in my circle, was just engulfed with the theatrics of that music. Even some of the history behind it, even the Norwegian black metal scene where, there's the story of people burning churches and, doing all this weird stuff. And it's this mystical idea behind this music that I think I was drawn to. Not that I'm going to pursue that path, but, it was this whole mysticism behind the music that I was drawn to, and ended up playing, gigging as early as 15, playing that kind of music, believe it or not, in basement and church basements of all things. They'd be renting out these venues, and it would be church basements where these really heavy metal, death metal bands would come together and just play 30-minute sets. And people are thrashing against the walls and, being respectable, respecting the venue, of course, but, so playing these sort of underground venues and, VFWs, churches, and all that stuff, was whole part of that scene, and meeting a lot of people, learning a lot of different bands. But what was interesting was, wasn't listening to jazz music at all, but I found that I was playing like an improviser, or I was improvising. I was never playing the same parts twice. And so I even got complaints from my band. My band was just saying, you don't play the same stuff. Like, where's that fill that you normally do? And like, what do you mean that fill I normally do? I don't know what you're talking about. and then I was introduced to the Mahavishnu Orchestra. Then I realized, this is also a world of jazz. This is also something that, you ask Wynton Marsalis, it's not jazz. But this world comes from that history. And so I learned about the Mahavishnu Orchestra. I learned about the whole Tony Williams lifetime. And I'm like, oh my God, like double bass can fit in jazz? Wow. Who would have thought? And so that was crucial for me. And then I ended up getting more into that kind of music, the less heavier stuff. And, but then again, I think the whole metal experience that I've grown up with and the heaviness and the emotional impact of it has kind of dictated the direction I've gone in jazz. Like the music I really love, like Albert Ayler, the more aggressive music of the 1960s, the more aggressive John Coltrane, not necessarily the Giant Steps John Coltrane, which is great. I love jazz. I love all eras of it, but there's something about that 60s avant-garde that is really beautiful to me. And so I still kind of carry that mysticism of heavy metal into my jazz, I guess. And so I ended up getting a master's degree in, we'll call it jazz, but it was modern American music where we focused on, jazz as well. So I ended up, later on in my life I just made that transition to the improvised world. And then, believe it or not, now I'm teaching jazz history at a college in Boston. So from the most heaviest of heavy metal, I'm now teaching kids about Louis Armstrong and, how the music today wouldn't be the same without that music they would consider like their grandparents' music, and how beautiful it is. And listen to this Louis Armstrong solo. Eddie Van Halen wouldn't be ripping solos if it wasn't for Louis Armstrong's West End Blues in 1928. So, it seems like an interesting path to change from heavy metal to jazz, but it made sense to me, and I'm happy it did.
Yeah, man. And, I think we're all too quick to say, oh, well, that's not in a genre that I listen to. Or, you know what I mean? Like we want to put simple, easy labels on everything. And the world's not so simple or easy, right? I mean, but because, some of the stuff that you mentioned, heavy metal influences, like you said, Metallica. And, I don't think it's any stretch when you listen to the first 3 Metallica records, I hear classical music very, just plainly as day, it all comes from, classical kind of things, the shredding guitar, that stuff that Paganini and those guys were doing back hundreds of years ago in some cases. And jazz and the blues and everything else has influenced every subgenre of rock music to its core, I think. So, I don't know that it's that big a stretch, but I think to people that aren't, maybe creative types, they're like, oh, heavy metal to jazz, that's crazy. But it's not really if you sit down and think about it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm in that same camp that you're talking about. A lot of it is so similar. There's a great Ornette Coleman quote, who said, there are 12 notes that satisfy the whole world. No note has a style. It's kind of how you play it, how you attack it. The same notes that Coltrane is blowing on his horn are the same notes that, Kirk Hammett is playing on his guitar solo and, insert Metallica song here. This is how they're being played. So, you can get into the whole philosophical thing about like genre, like what is genre? Let's think beyond genre, that kind of stuff. But yeah, I don't want to get too deep on that, but very similar, I believe.
Yeah, for sure, man. Well, I just, I do like getting deep on these subjects because it makes me think and rethink certain things. You know what I mean? But you were talking about the mysticism of metal and heavy rock and those things. Some of that mysticism is now gone. When I was a kid growing up, there really wasn't any internet. I had never gone onto AOL or whatever until I was a senior in high school. So, now you can find out what your favorite rock star ate for lunch like 20 minutes ago. But back when I was coming up, it was, you just didn't know things. Gosh, I wonder what the new record's going to sound like. I wonder what the new logo is going to be. Just all those things. And some of that's gone in modern music.
I think a lot of it's gone. And I think a lot of the younger generation feels it. And unfortunately, me as a 37-year-old, I still feel it. I'll get to that sort of, I try sometimes to experience that as more and more, but I feel like I find myself, I can't, I miss that mysticism that you're talking about, cold buying a CD because of the cover or the record label. It's like, oh wow, Cannibal Corpse is on this record label. They must be awesome because they're on the same label as Cannibal Corpse. I'll buy this,
right?
And then you take it home and you have this whole new band that you never knew it existed because of that record label. It's like, and then the interesting thing is people like in the bands like Slayer, like people actually thought that they were devil worshipping, like evil people. But when you see them like with their family, having a good time, like out to eat nowadays, it's like, oh my God, there's nothing mystical about Slayer. They're just normal people. So that's one of the things metal brought to me too. It's like I figured these people were like out there, like they were, you know, doing weird stuff. But in fact, they shop at the same stores I do, and they, you know, they put Christmas trees during Christmas time, and they put presents under the tree for their kids. You know, it's this world that, you know, we didn't know that then, and again, I miss that. I miss being naive about the whole metal scene and thinking it was a lot more gory than it was.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those guys are taking their family to Applebee's on Friday night, you know, if they're not on tour. Exactly. I mean, it's pretty vanilla. You know, somebody asked me once, you know, they were like, you know, gosh, I wonder, I was at a show and they were like, I wonder what's going on backstage, you know, and I was like, they're probably talking about what cholesterol medication they're on now. You know, I mean, it's not like some wild, crazy party. These guys are in their 50s now. You know, they're talking about their kids' soccer tournament. I mean, that's just, you know, and I think the point is, you know, some of that is lost in this day and age, you know, social media and Instagram and, you know, Snapchat and all those things. Like, you can find out what Lars had for lunch yesterday. Not hard to figure it out. But, you know, 30 years ago, you were like, gosh, I wonder what he's going to do on this upcoming album. And you had to wait, right?
Yeah.
There was no sneak preview. There was no leaking it to, you know, social media. You had to wait and go buy the album.
Yeah. You know, you mentioned that too, but the AOL thing, the back of one of the metal magazines I used to buy would have email addresses that you could email the bands. And oftentimes it was their instant messenger screen names. So I would, you know, creepily message them on AOL when they were online and actually talk to them about their music. They were really open to talk to this kid about their music. And that was, to me, that was huge. Like, oh my God, they're real people who go online. It was amazing. So, but yeah, it was, you know, having the access to the email address, like, wow, I can email my favorite band. Like, what is email, first of all, and how do I get one of these addresses to email these people?
Yeah.
Or can I use it as a screen? So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was just, it was a whole different time and world. And I agree with that. But, you know, I want to talk about the new release as well. And again, you're probably going to have to help me with this because, you know, it's, how will I say this? And I mean this in the best way possible. It's slightly an esoteric project, right? The album.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But I listened to it this afternoon, and a couple of things that really stick out to me. I mean, you guys are going for the, you know, avant-garde improvisation kind of thing, I think. And it doesn't sound like a traditional, you know, spang-a-lang, you know, jazz record. This isn't your dad's bebop record, kids.
No.
It's really cool, and it all makes a little more sense to me now that I know you come from a metal background. It all makes way more sense to me. So help me out with the title of the album, and let's talk about the concept that it was based on.
Yeah, so I probably don't pronounce this correctly either, but I've always been telling people it's Eine Quartett Des Grauens. And what it is it's basically a play on the original Nosferatu title, which was Nosferatu Eine Symphonie des Grauens, which was a symphony of horror. So I changed it to a quartet of horror, which is the Dylan Jack Quartet. And the Dylan Jack Quartet, first of all, has been around since 2016. And we've had our iterations of jazz. And you talk about spang-a-lang. Well, our first record was pretty much that. Fresh out of grad school, you know, jazz harmony nerd. Like, let's do this really ridiculous chord that we don't have to do just because jazzers do it. And so the second album was a little bit more free. And then fast forward to the pandemic, we ended up doing a record which was completely free, which, fast forward to this year, we're releasing the album. I've always had the idea of playing along to a silent film. But the idea was, how do I do it and when do I do it? So the idea was brewing for a couple of years. And again, I'm not a horror aficionado or anything. Like I don't have horror posters on my walls. I don't have a collection of horror movies. But there's something about Nosferatu that was really interesting to me. And it just so happened that last year was the centennial for the movie. So I said, all right, this has to happen. Like, we have to do this. And so I booked a concert before I did anything. I said, I went and visited the theater. I booked it. I gave a deposit. And I emailed the guys and I said, all right, we're doing it. So I had to get to work on what I wanted to do. And so this whole project started off as not even a record. We were just going to play live to the movie. And then after we did the theater, the shows, we were going to record our version of the movie. And so for months, I lived and breathed Dracula. I read the book. I put two and two together with Nosferatu. Who are these characters in Nosferatu? Because if you don't know, Nosferatu is based on Bram Stoker's Dracula. And there was a whole lawsuit over it because the Bram Stoker's estate wasn't getting any money. And so they basically, Nosferatu stole from Bram Stoker and in Dracula. So I read the entire book. I wrote little things on how the characters relate to Dracula and Nosferatu. I watched Nosferatu God knows how many times. And what I ended up doing was I wrote 4 very small themes for each character. There's Hutter, Ellen, Knock, and of course Count Orlok, who is Nosferatu, which means undead. It's like an Eastern European term for undead. And so there are 4 themes that we play throughout the film, and the entire film is improvised. We put those themes where we see fit. When there's a character on the screen, it can be guitar playing Orlok's theme, or it could be bass playing Orlok's theme, or it could be the trumpet playing Orlok's theme. There's really no boundary for my band of who wants to play what. We're on the scene. You know, we listen to what they're doing, and we pretty much improvised our way through it. And we did a performance at a college in Lowell, Massachusetts, and then we did a performance in Peabody, Massachusetts, which is great because it was right next to Salem, Massachusetts, which is Halloween capital of the world. And of course, we did them in October, so it was like you know spooky time, and we had a decent crowd. It was nice, and one of the main reasons I decided to do this was because I've learned that oftentimes people don't want to come and sit and watch 4 people improvise. They want to do something. They want to, there's just be something to it. So I said, why don't we just put a film and improvise to the film? And that's how we got the Nosferatu thing. I always tell people, more people saw the Nosferatu performance between the 2 performances that we did, than have seen me play in like 2 years. So those 2 shows had that many people there for those. And it was this whole eye-opening experience for me. And of course, I'm thinking more and more about what do I do with this now? Can I top this? What's the next step where I'm not repeating myself? But interestingly enough, and I got to give credit to Eric, the guitar player, he called me and he said, why don't we, after we do the film, why don't we record the themes, 1 take, and that's it. And then we'll put an album out. And I was like, I like that idea. So we spent an entire day in the studio recording Nosferatu. Everything was 1 take on the film. We stopped halfway through for lunch, and then we finished it, and we didn't go back and do anything. So what you heard was hours and hours of rehearsal after 2 performances. So everything was put together. And then in about an hour, we put together an EP of improvised themes. Everything is 1 take. Everything is fresh and first idea, best idea. And, arranging right like a Count Basie head arrangement in a rehearsal. We sat there and we thought, okay, come in here, here we go, let's go. And whatever happened.
That's awesome.
No fault. Yeah, no false starts, no nothing. And that's our EP.
Well, I mean, I think it's a really unique and very creative way to, when you were talking about, the folks that came out to the live performances with the movie, right? You said more people saw me doing that. I think it's a very unique and creative way to, as you said, people don't necessarily want to go to a club and watch four guys or girls improvise for 40 minutes or whatever. So I think it was very smart on your part to kind of do it that way. And I hope it brings you great success, but I was kind of taken aback, when I read that, hey, this is based on this 100-year-old movie, I listened to it and I was like, man, wouldn't it be great if I had the movie? And you had already done that. So I came into this not knowing that, but, it's just really clever. And I love things that are really clever. So congratulations on that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, we're really excited about it. And, I know the band's really, excited about the record. And, we have some performances in October this year. I think we have 4 performances scheduled: New York, Providence, and then 2 in Massachusetts. And then I think I'm going to kind of put it to rest for a little bit. I mean, it's a lot of work. It's really stressful, and trying to book theaters is a real hassle. But I feel like, this is the direction that this quartet's going to go in for a little bit at least. I'm lucky that I have a group of musicians who stay and want to play. And I've had a band together for, how many years? 7 years in jazz. That doesn't happen.
Yeah.
In improvised music doesn't happen. Everybody plays with each other and goes different directions. But I've been lucky to have the same musicians pretty much. I know Jerry, the trumpet player, joined a little bit later, but the same rhythm section for 7 years. And that's not all we do. We play other, we'll even play weddings with each other. We'll play jazz standards at a wedding. There's just a reputation between us 3 that we play a lot with each other. We'll play straight ahead weddings, but we'll also come together and put together a Nosferatu record, which is awesome. Yeah. And that, we're not afraid to venture into, traditional jazz because we both love it. And we're all educators, every single one of us in the quartet. In some jazz idiom, we're all jazz educators. So, we're not thinking that our version of jazz is the best jazz. We take from everything that we can.
Yeah, for sure.
The world is changing, and people sometimes don't want to go listen to jazz anymore, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, and I've said this to other great jazz players that I've had on this show. I've had Bill Stewart, I've had Peter Erskine. I've had some heavy hitters in the world of jazz, and one of my big knocks on jazz is, like, if you go to New York and you go out to see, some bigger name player, everybody in the audience is probably going to be a jazz cat, what I refer to as a jazz cat. And you either fit into that group or you don't. And there is no gray area. So that's my knock on the jazz world. It's like, oh, well, maybe you're just not smart enough to understand it. And there's that kind of air that goes around. And again, my meter is good music or bad music, right? It's like, that's just all there is. And sometimes, being a non-jazz guy, a non-jazz cat, I get the whole, you're not one of us kind of things. And I don't think that should be that way.
No. And you're 100% right. I still feel that when I'm around people, there are those who are very open-minded, and there are those who, as they say in the jazz world, vibe each other, So there's a lot of vibing going on in those places. But I think I always tell people too, like, jazz is thought of as this high art, and it is, absolutely. But you have to realize where this music came from. This music came from low-down blues. This music came from people who didn't know how to play instruments, picked up their instruments, and figured things out on their own. Or, there was no rule. There was no jazz theory. Like, all of this stuff came from nothing. and it was creative and it was inventive, and somebody came and put rules to it. And I think if you keep that in your head, it'll keep you humble. Like, this music is like dance music. Listen to New Orleans music. Listen to Congo Square. Like, examples, obviously we can't listen to music from Congo Square because it's, it predates recording. But like examples of what you would hear, African music, homemade wind instruments and drums. Like, that's the basis of jazz.
Yeah.
Think about this music came from that. Keep yourself humble. Don't vibe anybody, because, these people were playing this music way before you, inventing this music. Remember where it came from. I think that's the most important thing for people who play jazz, who have a tendency to vibe each other. It's remember where this stuff came from that you're, making a living at or want to make a living at.
Yeah.
They weren't playing sharp 11, 19, whatever, so it was.
Yeah. I agree with you. I completely, I just think that, and I'm not just specifically picking on the jazz world. I mean, there are guys that are, blues players that are like, oh, you're not playing that Delta blues right, boy.
Mm-hmm.
You're not cool enough. And like every single note seems like, a battle for the realism of the art form. Right. And
yeah.
And it's just like, yeah, man, there's not, it doesn't have to be encyclopedic, right? Every single time. But, the whole thing with improvisation that you guys do, it most of the time it's not about what you're playing. It's about what you're not playing. You have to have really good ears to be in a room with 3 or 4 other people playing off of one another. How would you say to somebody that wants to try that, how do you develop that skill? Because it's a hard one to develop.
Yeah, and I think I had to work backwards, because I was that kind of person who listened but did too much. I think when you're in a room, the less is more approach is really important, because then you can build from there. If you start with so much, you're not really listening to the full room. You're listening to yourself. You're trying these licks you were practicing or things like that. But if you start simple and you answer someone's question that they throw at you, like if someone's playing a guitar riff and you hear that there's silence, and if you have something to say, say it. Add a couple hits with your bass drum or an accent with your snare. But you know what? If you have nothing to say, don't worry about it. Like, you don't have to add a ton to the conversation. You can speak with these instruments and fill in gaps and leave space. Because if you leave space, someone else is going to fill it in, most likely. And you can sit back as a listener and just listen to the beautiful music you're creating. If you're laying a nice groove, if you're a drummer, I'm talking about, if you're a drummer and you're laying down a groove and you really don't have anything to say, except for a couple of things here and there, you're still improvising and you're still adding something really important to the conversation. Just because Elvin Jones played a ton of triplets when he was talking with John Coltrane, you're not talking with John Coltrane on the bandstand. You're talking with somebody else. So don't play like Elvin talking with Coltrane. You got to make sure that you have your own conversation with somebody and you let them speak and they'll let you speak. And then when you're done, you guys have had this conversation and it feels really good. I've learned that listening back to myself, like, wow, I'm playing too much. And the less I play, listen back, I go, man, what a beautiful conversation with that person. We spoke, we learned something about each other. We went somewhere different. Like, we were adding some interesting rhythms with each other. We were punctuating sentences, or we were adding commas here or semicolons, and we created this beautiful phrase with each other. And I think that's the important thing, is build from there. Start super, super simple. There's no need to throw all your hot licks out there. I think it was John Riley who said in his Beyond Bop book, like, all this information is precious. Don't use it. Like, just practice it, understand it, but don't you dare play this in a context. You learn it so that if you hear it can be used, use it.
Yeah.
Don't use it because you know it.
Yeah.
It's like when if you read a book and everybody needs to, like, they have to throw all their scholarly words out there, I shut it right away. It's like, man, I don't want to hear this. Give me something I can read and learn from. I don't want to have to be looking up your words.
Yeah.
Let me do it. That's me. I don't want to read all the scholarly words, these words I have to look up. So.
Yeah, man. Dude, that's some really good advice. I love it. And, one of the things that always sticks out to me, the great Jeff Williams said to me, in an interview, he was like, stop thinking. He was like, when I'm in a situation where it's all improv, he was like, I just have to tell myself, stop thinking. Stop thinking about what to play next. Stop thinking about what's going on. Just be. And gosh, when I think back about that, I'm like, man, that's spot on. And that's probably why I'll never be a good jazz player, because I can't turn that off. And I have this, crazy desire to have a backbeat on every 2 and 4. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. It just coming from the rock world. It's very difficult for people that aren't in that world to turn that off, that instinct.
It is. It's very hard. And I honestly don't know if people actually achieve that level that they want. I think like anything music, we always try to be better and better. And I think the one thing that's practiced, that we should practice more is as a jazz musician, is actually practice improvising. I think we can get caught up in like different books and texts and exercises, but put the book away and actually practice improvising for a little bit, and you'll learn like, what do I do? And it's like, oh, this whole new world to practice. It's just, practicing the actual idea of letting your mind go. And it's one of the hardest things to do. Yeah. Because we get so stuck in our heads. That's the other thing about education, is we get so stuck in our heads when it comes to college or lessons. It can be really hard to break away from that stuff. I'm using jazz musicians as references, but I believe it was Albert Eiler who said, or maybe even Charlie Parker. I think it might have been both. Charlie Parker once said it in like a lesson, learn everything in all 12 keys and then forget it. Just like do all that work and then forget you did it. Yeah. And then something inside of you, it will come out and you're playing more organically. I don't play saxophone, so I don't know, but I can understand kind of his methodology behind it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, look, just because you can play blazing fast radamucus or, whatever the case may be, it doesn't mean you should do that in some tender love ballad on the bandstand at a wedding, right? I mean, it's right. Like, so it's the same kind of thing for rock players too. I say all the time, it's not necessarily about the notes that you play. It's about the ones you don't, the space, the breath. Right. I mean, that's kind of where the magic happens in all musical forms.
Yes. I find that hard too. I've had to stop myself because as a jazz musician, I play a lot on the snare drum. And when I would play rock gigs, and I have one coming up too, it's hard for me to just play 2 and 4 with no ghosts. It's a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
It's a very, very hard thing to do. And it's so frustrating when I catch myself in the band scene and say, man, stop it. Just play 2 and 4.
Yeah.
Like, you realize, like, the older I got, it's like, how hard is it to play 2 and 4? It's actually pretty tough to just sit there and lay back and, like, hear your 2 and 4 without any additional notes in between. Just whack, whack. And it just sounds beautiful. And it feels great to do that, But yeah, it's really hard to do.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's hard for anybody to do. I mean, look, I'm an Irish guy. I love, Van and all of his music. But, like, the thoughts of playing Brown Eyed Girl again, you get bored with that real quick. Yeah. And you're like, okay, can I put a ghost note on the E? Can I, whatever the case may be. And you start getting into that zone of, I'm putting stuff there that just doesn't need to be there. Right.
Yeah.
It's the hardest thing in the world because, if, I don't know how many wedding gigs you do, but it's always Brown Eyed Girl, Brick House, Celebrate, and you're just like, I don't want to play this the way the record is. Because your mind just starts wandering. And sometimes you just have to get lost in the kick on 1 and 3, the snare on 2 and 4, and hit the hi-hat on all of them. Yeah,
I mean, you can meditate on that for a while too. If you can zone out just playing something like that. I used to try to do that. Just play something simple over and over and over and just meditate on it. And something like a 2-4, like it's just a steady backbeat. It just feels great. And you can get into a zone and just kind of out of body experience listening to the whole band and how your groove fits. It's awesome. But again, it's from my world of just being overly busy. That's a hard thing to do.
Yeah, man, it is. And, I think we're both speaking the truth here, but if you can, as you said, meditate on just that simple rock groove, 1 and 3 on the kick, 2 and 4 on the snare, in the rock world, that's the stuff that'll get you hired for the next 12 gigs, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Nobody cares about your awesome flourish of ghost notes. All over everything else, like a band leader, a singer, a guitarist, whatever. They're going to be like, oh man, that guy just came in and locked it down. He folded it up, and that's what we needed.
Yeah, the steadiness of the groove. And I think the most important thing is overlooked by a lot of young drummers is know the damn form so that they can trust you.
Oh yeah.
We often overlook that stuff. Not even just jazz. Don't worry about those forms, but like your pop tunes, they have those tricky little things in there. You got to know that form. So you keep it simple and study that form, because that's all that stuff happening is really, really hard. That's the one thing I found in all music that's really hard now for drummers is a lot of times young drummers forget that there's a form of a song and they'll like listen and rely on somebody else. No, people listen to you to rely on playing that fill into the chorus or playing that fill into the bridge. They're relying on you to know that damn form.
Absolutely. But yeah, because if you're in something that's got a lot of turnarounds or little sidewalks or whatever the case may be, if you miss it, everybody's going to turn around and look at you, period.
Yeah.
They're not looking at the keyboard player. They're not looking at the bass player. They're looking at you because, hey man, you were supposed to do a fill to bring us out of that section or to carry us into the next section. And I agree. Young people that are listening know the form of the song, learn the arrangement because that's your job, unfortunately or fortunately, however you want to look at it. But knowing the arrangement is your job as a drummer.
Yeah, there's that comfort level that you want to give people and that you want to feel from people too that you're playing with. You want to feel comfortable on the bandstand, because if you're comfortable and you feel good, then you're home free for the rest of the night. You're like, I know what we're doing. I'm good.
Yeah.
You can breathe. And I think that's the point where you mentioned, that's when you don't have to think because you know it. It's like I'm just playing on autopilot and I know this form inside and out. You're just listening like you listen to the song. Now you're just listening to the music that you've been preparing for. You're not even worried about playing. You're just playing and you're in the zone. You're in the music. And that's when you can start to meditate on that stuff. You're just listening, having a good time.
Yep.
Whether you hate the song or not, it's still a good time playing that groove.
Yep. Preach it, brother Dylan. Let me tell you, I'll leave you with this. I was on a, kind of a multi-band festival gig. This has been several years ago and everybody's going to remain anonymous, but, the band that played directly after us, I just remember the monitor engineer was asking the drummer, he was like, well, what do you want in your wedge? And he was like, guitar and vocals, no bass. And I was, I just looked at my bandmates and I was like, they're not going to be very tight. I guarantee it.
Yeah.
I don't know where that comes from. I really don't. If it works for you, great. But, know your lane and get in it and do it well.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's kind of what we can take for the last 10 minutes of conversation that we've had.
Yeah. Yeah. You gotta, it's the bass thing. I think it's really important to hear everybody, for the most part, because, you want to hear how you fit in. Like he's like, you want to fit into that band. You're a team. Like I always tell students who also play sports, like, you're playing with a band. You're a team. You got to hear everybody. Don't leave somebody out. You got to know how you're fitting in with that bass player. How that singer, are you matching that? Are you playing, like, are you inside that singer's phrasing? Are you in the guitar, playing hits together? Like, you want to hear that stuff. You got to be engaged with all that stuff. That's really important.
Yeah. It is. And if you're missing any of the ingredients, the cake won't rise. I mean, that's the analogy that I always use. You can't skip the flour. You can't skip the sugar. You can't skip the eggs. You got to have it all. So, all right, brother. Well, listen, I want to be respectful of your time. Before I let you go, the website is it DylanJackMusic.com?
Yes.
Okay.
DylanJackMusic.com. Yeah.
Fantastic. And I'm assuming, you're teaching at the college and everything. Are you still taking on private students as well?
I am. I'm mostly teaching through a beautiful institution in Groton, Massachusetts. But at the college level, I just teach history. I'm not teaching any lessons, but online I do accept students. I do accept, or unless they're local to the Bristol, Rhode Island area, which everybody's local to the Bristol, Rhode Island area in Rhode Island because it's so small.
Right.
But so yeah, I am accepting private students. That's the long answer. Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Well, and, we've got listeners all over the country. So, if somebody's looking for some lessons, I always want to, try to make that connection if I can. And, the album is going to be out on October 22nd. 27th. Okay. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
So, just to be clear, are you guys doing physical copies of this, or is it only going to be through like Bandcamp and Spotify and all those places?
Well, I have a limited run of 100 CDs because mostly it's been, sales have been online, digital Bandcamp stuff. But I had to do a physical copy of this just because it was this was my baby. This whole thing was a very big learning experience for me, and I thoroughly enjoyed every step of it. And I felt like it wasn't complete to not have a physical copy. So there's a very limited run of those.
Okay. Well, I always ask because that's the format that pays you the most, and that's what we want to sell here. So, I'm assuming folks can reach out to you through the website if they want to get their hands on a physical copy. Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. Fantastic.
And, I know the movie will be up too at that time too. I believe, and that will be accessible at that, on the 27th as well.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I can't wait to get the full experience, I'm awesome. going to make sure I do that because, again, as I was listening to it, I was like, gosh, I wish I had the movie. And, like I said, I didn't know the history of the project. So that's going to be cool. And I'll look forward to that as a special Halloween treat this year.
Awesome. Fantastic. That's when it's best enjoyed.
Absolutely. Well, Dylan, and man, I mean this sincerely. Anytime you've got anything going on that you want to share, we'll have you back in a heartbeat. Just let me know. And, we'd love to catch up with you and keep up with your career as things change. So, make sure you put me in the speed dial there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jamie, very much. This is fantastic.
You are welcome. We're going to send some folks your way, and I appreciate you taking the time to come on, man.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. We'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, man.
All right, guys and girls, that's going to wrap up episode 161 of the Drum Shuffle podcast. As always, thank you so much for listening to our podcast. We simply cannot do this without each and every one of you doing so week in and week out. We really appreciate it. The biggest thing you can do to help us out is share a link with a friend. That helps us more than you'll ever know. It costs you nothing, and it means the absolute world to me. So share a link with a friend and tell them to check out the Drum Shuffle podcast. Another thing you can do to help us out is hit the subscribe button on whatever platform you use to listen to the podcast. You don't want to miss any of the upcoming episodes that we have. We try to do a really great job of having a wide variety of drummers on the show to talk about their careers and projects, and the future is going to be no exception to that rule. As always, I answer every single email that we get over here at the podcast. Our email address is thedrumshufflepodcast@gmail.com. Our web address is thedrumshuffle.com, and you can always find more information about me over at jamieeads.com. Again, thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening. It means the world to me. I hope everybody has a great week out there. Go catch some live music before it all goes away. So until next time, may your heads stay strong and your sticks never break. Cheers, everybody.